A lot of people, when they think about crossed boundaries, they think it's like a big altercation, right? But it's really just agreements.
Do you know the boundary for yourself first and foremost? And then are you able to articulate boundaries to team early and often and consistently and create that habit of articulating those boundaries? And then when the boundaries cross, a little bit easier to hold them accountable because they've crossed that boundary.
Take some ownership and ask yourself the question, did I condition people to treat me this way from what I've allowed?
So have you articulated the standard? Have you let them know what the boundary was?
Oh, do you mean I had to tell them?
Yeah, no, they should know. Well, they should know, but they didn't, and the communications response you get, that's on you.
The things that separate high performers, the routines, the habits, the resilience, the ownership.
That's in my emotional drive. That's what I'm going to tap into. What is the plan I need to do to get that? And then what is the activity and actions I need to take to do that? And then what other habits I need to bring into doing that? And all of a sudden you've got habits which are then connected to that emotional drive. Then you've got a plan and an activity, and then you can set some boundaries around that activity and holding people accountable, holding yourself accountable. Where those activities become a habit, we start seeing people start going, I was playing a bit safe with that goal. I can sort of see I could exceed that kind of now.
Welcome to the Life Puzzle Podcast.
Good to see you again.
It's good to see you too. I think when it comes to sustainable success, that the things that separate high performers from people who are maybe just getting by or coasting along is the fact that they probably don't have the routines, the habits, the resilience, the ownership. And what I really wanted to talk to you about today was just looking at and dissecting some of those things so that the people that are listening along can kind of get some insights around some of the people that we work with who make really big shifts really, really quickly just by doing some small things. So, I mean, we've been doing some kickoffs, trainings, moving into the 26th financial year, and we've been meeting with lots of high performers. What's been your take on what we've seen around the country and, with some of these big brands that we've been working with?
Yeah, because some of them have been with us for a little while now. And the takeaway is like, oh my God, when Brad and Shonda were harping on about the diary and 15-minute intervals and things like that, I thought, how the hell am I? They don't understand my job.
People hating on us in the process too. It's like, what do you mean the diary?
Do you have any idea how reactive my day is? Going through to going, oh my God, my calendar is color coordinated. I know where I'm doing, where I'm going through, my sense of calm at the beginning of the day. When things go wrong, I'm like, okay, cool, it's going wrong. I'll sort this out. But able to correct and get back onto it. Well, it's that simple thing of just having a 15-minute to look at your day, look at your email, look at your plan, what you're going through. At the end of the day, 15 minutes to look at what's tomorrow. So you can leave the day with a sense of completion on that day. That habit really makes a big difference to your work-life balance. And again, so many people talk to us about, having that work-life balance. But if that was a habit that you needed to do to give yourself more energy and recharge, that'd be the first thing to do. So just go through and start your day off well, finish your day. That simple habit of just going through and closing off the day consciously, making that a point to be able to go through and break before you actually walk into the other part of your life.
Yeah. And I think that brings a focal point for the day too. I remember a number of years ago, I was working with this gentleman that kind of had a lot of anxiety, a lot of worry, often quite paranoid about things that potentially could happen. And we did this exercise where we kind of looked at, well, how do you actually want to finish your day? What is it exactly that you would like to be ending the day with? And we just got him to do like a visual mental rehearsal around how we finish the day. And we do this with a lot of our clients now in terms of creating that vision of how they want to finish the day. And I think it's been interesting to see some of the things that come out of that, right?
Yeah, it is, because, and to give it some structure, they've got to state a smart goal for the end of the day. And that means they have to say it the way they want it. And a lot of the times these people are staying the day off and saying, oh my God, I hope this doesn't go wrong. I hope this doesn't go wrong.
Focusing on what they don't want.
Yeah. And then wondering why it happens. So it's been really good. It's been good because they start to have to catch their language of what they're saying. They start the habit of being aware of what comes out of their mouth consciously. And as a result of that, they're then sort of starting that one thing they're going to do. And it doesn't have to be the hugest thing, but that completion of that thing creates a sense of a motivation to do more. It dials down the stress. You can walk away from the day and go, you know what? Yep, I had a busy day, but I planned to get that one thing done. I got that one thing done. I set a boundary for myself. I kept that promise to myself. I made it happen. And how much better do I feel? Even if it's just a small thing, it makes a big difference.
Yeah, and I think that all of those things actually add to more resilience. Like when I look at the the process of people actually putting a focus into what it is that they want, a lot of the time some of their worst fears or the things that they thought were going to be the stuff that they didn't want to happen start to disappear, and they go, oh, it's so amazing, you've changed me so much, when really all they've done is just change the focus for themselves.
Yeah, just become a little bit conscious of it. I mean, what's probably when you think about our sort of, our emerging leaders, and we get into people who have been a leader for a period of time, who are then getting into that and having that calls. What's some of the habits that you've seen, those already high-performing people? We've got a couple of people that are pretty up there as far as their high performance, and they've come from a successful background, whether it be sports or other businesses and things like that. But they've still had to sort of go through and get some habits. So what's some of the things that those high-performance leaders, the ones that are doing pretty good and kind of know it all kind of thing to a degree, what's one of the things, the big habits that you've had come out of that there's been a game changer for them?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's so many things that we could draw on here, and one of the things that I notice as a constant between some of these high performers that are already at a certain level but they recognize that they can take it next level is that they start actually looking at their body and their choices with their body, right? And so they're looking at how intentional they are around what they're eating, how intentional they are about their choices around what time they go to bed, even simple things around getting conscious around breathing and not sighing and doing all sorts of things that like help them to actually look after the vessel, if you like, that actually keeps their mind going. And I think this is a really interesting thing for me, because personally I used to be one of those high performers that just thought, oh well, as long as my mind is solid and I'm fueled by coffee and
Yes. As long as I have coffee, I am good.
Hashtag coffee's my blood type, and as long as we've got an intravenous drip for coffee, then I'm fine. But in all seriousness, and you know this because you've known me for a number of years now, a couple of decades nearly, and I used to be the kind of person where I thought that my mindset's so strong, I don't need sleep, I don't really need to worry too much about what I'm doing with my nutrition, or that idea of that exercise and that breath work and choosing the right foods and meal prep, that seems like a good idea. Yeah, when I get myself organised in my work, then I'll take care of some of those things. And I got challenged on this by a mentor a number of years ago, and I thought, I'm a very good student. I will take that on board. And I didn't really. I'm going to be honest with you. I didn't really believe the person when they said, "Hey, you got to do that first, and then the rest will catch up." And I thought, well, all right, I've got nothing to lose. I mean, I had probably second time over adrenal fatigue at that particular time. I lived off 4 hours sleep a night. I didn't eat. I drank a lot of coffee, and it wasn't working so well. So I actually invested and doubled down in terms of working on my own personal well-being and health, and actually put some boundaries in place. And that's probably another habit that we've seen really great high performers do. Put some boundaries in place, and through those boundaries and through actually honouring my own energy centre and the vessel first, I actually had a better mindset, a better emotional well-being and resilience to deal with more. But I think probably boundaries is a really big thing. Like, why don't you tell us a couple of things around some of the things you've been doing with people with boundaries? It's pretty impressive.
It is. It's really interesting, and it's a very simple process. And again, with all these tools we've gone through over the years, we've seen massive change. But how often do we come back to, the simplest thing? It's so powerful. We go, why have we got all these great tools? And just go back to the basics. They're even better.
I know,
sort of
right?
Stuff. So the boundaries is a classic one, because they're so unconscious. They're so out of your awareness.
Yeah.
And there's boundaries you have with yourself. Mm-hmm. And if you don't have boundaries with yourself first and foremost, it's going to be very hard for you to have boundaries for others. But a lot of times people have this concept of, they crossed my boundary, okay, or then they're not. And again, another example, it may not say you've crossed my boundary. You've you said you're going to do that task and you haven't done it, which is the same thing as crossing a boundary. I mean, an agreement's been made, you said that.
But I think that's an important point you make, because a lot of people, when they think about crossed boundaries, they think it's like a big altercation, right? But it's really just agreements.
Yeah, because 9 times out of 10, okay, so have you articulated the standard? Have you let them know what the boundary was?
Oh, do you mean I had to tell them?
Yeah, no, they shouldn't. They should know. Well, they should know, but they didn't. And the communications response you get, that's on you.
Yeah.
So a lot of times that's the case. So I look at the conversation and going, okay, A, do you know the boundary for yourself first and foremost? Do you know what your boundaries are? And then are you able to articulate boundaries to team early and often and consistently, and create that habit of articulating those boundaries? And then when the boundaries cross, it's a little bit easier to hold them accountable because they've crossed that boundary. Because if they don't know where the boundary is and they've crossed it, then they're going to get upset. They get feedback, but goalposts move, right?
Yeah, exactly.
So I think a classic example when it comes to habits and being able to make that time is setting some time when you've got to work on some deep work and do some things, setting a time. It doesn't have to be, it's not 4 or 5 hours, it's, an hour max of what you're going to be doing and saying, hey, I'm not available for this period of time. I'm doing this. Please hold any questions or emails or see this person, or I'm happy to see you at this time. So all of a sudden we've created a boundary for ourselves for time. Now everyone's holding us accountable because we've said we're doing this thing and this task, we better do it. So we can't go Facebook scrolling. And we've also let everybody know what the task, what the boundary is, and we've set that up. And after people a little while, what happens is you set that standard, then people don't necessarily cross it. They're aware of it, and you then teach people how to treat you.
Yeah, I love that so much. I think I read that statement somewhere in terms of teaching people how to treat you, and I think that's a really powerful tip for anyone who's listening or follows us. Is that if you don't really like the way that people are treating you, then you've got to take some ownership and ask yourself the question: did I condition people to treat me this way from what I've allowed? The things that I never spoke up about, and I think that it can be changed rather easily if we just start to put some of those things in place. And it always reminds me of, we talk about Craig a lot, when we talk about boundaries and we talk about values. And one of the interesting things about Craig is that he often will talk about the fact that you're either early or you're late, and he's very frustrated and gets really grumpy when people run a bit late for him. But basically, one of the interesting things is that everyone that knows Craig knows that if there's any possibility that you're going to be running late for a meeting with Craig, that you must call and make a new agreement about what time you're going to be there. And so through his process of enforcing the boundary, telling people that you're either early or you're late, he's actually conditioned people how to treat him in a manner of respect when it comes to respect and time. And I think that that's so interesting. And it certainly, I think it relates back to the ability to be disciplined. A lot of the time when people are trying to enforce habits or they're trying to create standards for themselves, they'll do it for a little while and it gets hard, or potentially, they might get some flack or someone will react to them when they try and enforce a boundary. What recommendations do you have for people when they're really confronted by the idea of being disciplined?
Yeah. And again, it's that word discipline, right? Is it a bad word? Being consistent.
I was reading, it actually means discipline comes from a Latin derived word of to be a disciple to your higher self.
Yeah, there you go. Yeah, well, that makes sense. It does kind of compute that, doesn't it?
Yeah.
So, look, I think that what ends up happening in that scenario is people sort of fall unconscious of their end goal. So, if you're got a goal to save X amount of money, got a goal to hit a KPI, got a goal to hit a weight gain or a health goal or something along those lines, you get to the point where the motivation is conscious, you're doing it, and that all starts to die off. And then what's left is the willpower. And if we don't have the willpower, it's not, we often ask other people to hold us accountable. I've got my accountability coach, Pebbles, my 13-year-old dog, who is very cranky if I don't take her for a walk.
I bet.
And even she started sort of backing off sometimes when it's been a bit cold lately. I've had to drag her out because I'm like, if I don't take her now, she's going to cross a boundary later. When I'm on a call, she's going to start crying for a walk, and I can't take her. So it's being aware of that, and again, probably just coming back and the short answer to the question, come back and look at your goal. Go back to the goal. Get that emotional connection to that goal you want to keep yourself resetting on that focus. So when it does waver, becomes a little bit too hard, you can revitalize yourself and get more focused on that emotional buy-in for that goal you want. And then hopefully over a few more actions on that, then the habit will install.
Yeah, and I think that's a really important point, because there are so many times that people ask us about, goals and how effective they are and things like that. And we've seen people write some really rubbishy goals that they haven't been committed to. And we've seen them write some really great ones that they've been super committed to. And I think your point there around reconnecting with the goal, making sure that it's meaningful, making sure that it connects emotionally, that's a really important point that a lot of people miss when they're, looking at what habits do they need to form to actually connect with the goals. If it doesn't make you feel good, then you're probably not going to sustain it, right?
Yeah, I think that's a really important point. I think most people would have done or set a SMART goal in that process, and I spent many years traveling around doing seminars, having people do a SMART goal. And look, there was nothing wrong with the process of doing it, because I had many people call me years later and go,
Tell you about how they got the goals.
I set this goal 3 years ago and look, I got it, all sort of stuff, right? And I think that's good. But I think where the connection gets lost when we look at the goal setting and the vision boards and all these sort of things, which there's nothing wrong with doing it. But when you map it across into productivity, when you map it back into leadership, when you bring it back into the business sort of process, it can be a little bit perceived as a bit flaky.
Yes.
And I think that's where the habits come into and to meet the goal really clearly, because if you actually have a goal of what you want, there's an emotional drive connected to that. Yeah. That's the goal you want. And then you can go, okay, so the dream factor of what I want to achieve is the visionary, the concept of going out there, big picture, what do you want, start with the end in mind, all these things. That's the thing you want. Then you can go, okay, all right, so that's what I want. Set the goal, let it happen, wait for the universe to deliver it. Yep. Or you can go, that's in my emotional drive, that's what I'm going to tap into. Now I can look at what is the plan I need to do to get that, and then what is the activity and actions I need to take to do that. And then what other habits I need to bring into doing that? And all of a sudden you've got habits which are then connected to that emotional drive of that goal, that hairy-fairy sort of idea, dream, magic wand kind of goal that you want to achieve. But you've gone through the process of making sure it's, realistic and achievable, all those sort of things with a smart goal. But then you've got a plan and an activity, and then you can set some boundaries around that activity and holding people accountable, holding yourself accountable, where those activities become a habit. And all of a sudden we see 3 or 4 months into that, we start seeing people start going, I was playing a bit safe with that goal. I can sort of see I could exceed that kind of now.
I could have done more. I could have asked for a bigger dream, right?
Yes, exactly. Yeah.
Well, we always say have a goal that kind of makes your undies a little bit tight, or a big, hairy, audacious goal, if you like. But I think you made a really good point before around the dream goal plan action, and what we found over the years of training people in this field is that there are some people that are really big picture, and they're really good at having huge dreams that just make them feel really excited and amazing, and they don't necessarily know what to do in the next 15 minutes or the next week in order to be able to start working towards that really big, hairy, audacious goal or that really big dream. And then you've got people that are really good at being busy, and they're doing stuff, they're doing heaps of stuff, they're doing all the tasks and following the plan and ticking the boxes and all of those sorts of things, but they have no idea whether the stuff that they're doing right in this moment is actually contributing to anything in their dreams and goals and aspirations. And so I think the conscious connection that we're making here today, and we want people to really take away from this, is the fact that it's not actually about one or the other. Now, you've probably got a strength where you're working on one really well and a bit unconscious around the other, and you've got to figure out what that is for you. But then it's about being able to zoom in and zoom out on both, right? And we had some really powerful conversations with people around this for project plans during our leadership training this month, didn't we?
We did. And that mapped across into my team and my growth of my team. If you don't actually have a plan or a goal where you want to get your team to get to, then what are you measuring? And how are you measuring them? And how do they know that they're measuring up to your expectations?
Yeah. And what we know about people is that when they have confusion, they freeze. And so if it's much better to have the simplicity of that and link that in frequently than it is to actually just let people sit there and try and figure it out for themselves, because they will freeze and do nothing.
Yeah, or get frustrated and avoid.
Yes, or leave.
Or leave, yes.
Which obviously has been a very common thing for, some of our leaders that are just stepping into our programs. They're like, oh my God, I wish I had known this earlier. I wouldn't have lost some really talented people.
Yeah. And then that conversation of being, I don't want to have that conversation. What if they leave? Well, if you don't have the conversation, who's going to be doing their job anyway?
I think is it Richard Branson quoted it and said, what if I train them and they leave somewhere else? It's like, yeah, but what if you don't train them and they stay?
Yeah, exactly. So I think it's really clear when we look at a lot of the tools and techniques we look at being able to improve leadership and growth, it really comes back down to the fundamentals of where is your mind at, what activity you're going to be taking, what action you're taking on that, and getting clear on what that action is. And when you're able to get clear on the action, you take that action, and it meets in with the goals and the larger plan, then it's very easy for you to move past that concept of the discipline or the pain of having to do the same thing over and over again, because you've got that emotional connection to it, and the wins that you get along the way motivate you to keep going. And as a result of that, you get further and further away from where you were, and you're ready for that next big challenge.
And I think that one of the other habits that people underestimate is the power of talking to yourself in language that you can sustain and that also puts your focus in that direction. And I think, as you talk about the word discipline, words carry a lot of energy for a lot of people. And so the word discipline for many people makes them think about that school teacher that told them off, or it makes them think about when their parents, sent them to their room because they did something wrong. And so, I don't particularly love the word discipline. I mean, I've always been happy to do or to be disciplined with myself around certain things, but I don't particularly like the word. So, I usually replace it with, rhythm or, with being in the process of doing things. What is your thoughts around the words and what you've seen people do with words?
Well, with words, often I will talk to people who will articulate that they have anxiety. And I go, okay, that's interesting.
How did you decide that?
How did you decide that? Yeah. And,
Yeah.
and they've got that. And I've been going through a talk track with them using the concept around the language that you use and the label that you give that word, because, I don't know, test it out. But for me, worry, nervousness or anxiety is the same kinesthetic feeling in the body. It's the same kind of thing. But the label I give it can be very, very different. So if I give it anxiety, then it's like, oh, I've got anxious. I've got anxiety. If I give it worry, then I'm worried about something. Then the worry is about, okay, I'm worried about it. That's good because it's telling me I'm getting a notification here from my worry wall. I need to do something about it. So what do I need to do to make sure that happens? And nervousness, I mean, Dave Grohl, the lead singer of the Foo Fighters, and some would say a great musician and probably one of the better drummers of all time.
A little bias there.
Little bias.
Big shout out, Dave Grohl. You've got a big fan here.
Yes, Foo Fighters. He said, they are not nervous to play to an auditorium the day I give it up. I know I'm not going to have to give my best. All right. So
important.
Nervousness, you want to give your best, you want to be prepared. Worry, what can go wrong? How can you prepare yourself? And anxiety is basically just that fear of it going wrong and sort of stops you. But if you ask yourself, am I worrying about it or am I nervous or is it anxiety? That label can then, the word you use can change that same feeling but give it a different kind of outcome on that. And it's been quite amazing to watch people go, you know what, I thought I was anxious, but I'm just nervous because I really want to do a good job. Or I thought I had anxiety, but I realised I hadn't actually thought of what could go wrong to fix it.
And I've got a couple of things to say about this. The first thing is that I remember when I first realised that the labels of what we call things actually carry so much meaning for us. And I was doing some presentation coaching with a lady who had published a book, and she had a fantastic story, but she was terrified of public speaking. And so as someone who's always been quite happy to be in the spotlight, I mean, let's face it, I didn't have an ability to connect with her on the same level when it came to her stage fright. So I was asking her a lot of questions about it in terms of what was going on and what was she feeling in her body when she felt very anxious and upset about, being on stage. And it was so interesting because she started describing all of these things in terms of like this movement in her stomach and, her heart raced a little bit faster and all of those sorts of things. And she labelled all of this stuff anxiety. And what was really interesting was as she was describing all of the sensations and the feelings that she was going through, I thought, hang on, that's all the same stuff that I feel when I'm getting really excited to go on stage to present to a big group of people. And so as I look at those two labels, one for me was very empowering, and for her it was like a terrifying experience. But I think sometimes, and I'm going to say something that potentially could be seen as a little bit confrontational, perhaps maybe controversial if you like. And so I think that we're challenged at the moment in terms of the labels that people give to their emotional state and well-being. And so for me personally, I think that, and I know that you share the same idea, is that we understand that even negative emotions are actually good because they are a signal for us to know that something is not right. It's when we don't do anything with that signal that it then becomes a problem. And I think that there are lots of people in today's day and age that haven't necessarily caught on to that fact. And the emotional dysregulation that people feel is being left without any strategies to actually deal with that dysregulation. And so for that reason, people grab these labels that become very disempowering, and they actually believe that they have these mental health challenges at the extreme, when really it might just be moments of emotions that don't have a strategy for resolution.
Yeah, yeah, and I think that it's. I was reading an article last week around the fact that they're now looking at more alternative therapies around the anxiety factor, because I think that they've kind of worked out it's actually not. And there are examples of people who have got extreme cases of anxiety, in those scenarios. But I think that there's a big gap where a lot of people just don't have the tools to sort of be resilient, or the tools to overcome some things, and then it becomes a hell of a lot easier to say, I can't do that, I've got anxiety.
Well, for a lot of people, this is where it comes back to that ownership and that resilience as well. And I think that there are genuinely, as you said, I think there are genuinely some people that perhaps need some professional help to be able to get some of those strategies. And we're not necessarily saying that there's no such thing as mental health disorders. We've met many people over the years that have them. What I am saying though is I think that we're probably not doing as much. We're not sharing as many resources for people to be able to be resilient. And then you've added the factor around the fact that it's a lot harder for actually standing up and facing something than it is to say, you know what, I have this condition, I don't think I can do that, and for people to make allowances for that, or to expect that other people make allowances for that.
Yeah, and I was someone who had lots of labels, lots of reasons, and when I believe it or not, and when I learned NLP and they all got taken off me.
Oh, how dare they take those labels away from you, right?
I'm like, oh, who am I going to be without these labels? This is giving me justification for why I do this behaviour. I have this. That's why I do this.
Yes.
And then I realised that, well, it's a label I'm giving it, but it's also a behaviour, and a behaviour can change. So therefore, I can choose to, I can have that label, but I could look at it, okay, this is my label I've got. However, I'm actually going to use it as a superpower. And this is going to allow me to do these things, or I'm owning it and then going through a process. And sometimes people go, I had no idea you had that label. And I'm being very, very good at owning the fact that, I can control it, but I'm not going to let it be a reason why I can't do things.
Yeah, and I think what's really interesting about that is that, again, it comes down to the meaningfulness you assign to it, right? So we talked about that in an empowering way, but it can also be extremely disempowering when people give the wrong labels to things, or if they hide behind labels as a reason or an excuse not to be able to, show up and do something or be something or have something that they would like to have.
Yeah. And I think if we bring this back into the context of leadership, a presentation, the amount of leaders we've got that would go through and have to give a presentation that would bring them undone and would actually prevent them from actually going for an interview because they had to do a presentation to the group. And we've also seen it in our program because we thought, look, a great way, one of the greatest skills any leader has, it's been documented plenty of times, I'm not saying it's been documented well and truly, is being able to influence groups and being able to be a presenter or to present to a group or teach is one of the greatest assets a leader can have to develop themselves.
Yes.
And when you're not doing that, it's going to be a bad thing. So we actually had like a 10-minute teach and how to actually do a 10-minute presentation in our leadership program, and it was amazing. We couldn't work out what went wrong. All of a sudden, all these people said, oh, leadership's not for me, I can't do this. And we started realising, we got a bit deep, we found out actually it's this presentation. They thought they had to do a presentation in front of the whole group, which we never said. They assumed that.
Just
but
assumptions.
The concept of that presentation brought them undone, which is really interesting because, again, it's one of the greatest skills, and being able to articulate and overcome those sort of things was great. So it was a huge learning for us to be able to go through and do that and helping people get over that. And as a result of that, we've seen some people now like, oh, did you see that presentation that so-and-so did? Where did that come from?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think what's really exciting about it is that we saw people who were really terrified, as you said, to the point where they wanted to opt out of the program because they thought, and they gave us a bunch of reasons that weren't the real reasons. And through some questioning and being able to connect with them, we realised that was the case. But then the people who stood up, and through our conversations, we gave them an opportunity to step back in and to feel confident to be able to do that, to learn tools to be able to do that, to actually see them transform and to deliver presentations where their leaders are saying, hey, that work you're doing with that person, they're like a totally different person when they presented at that Monday morning meeting. That's really empowering, not just for them, obviously, but it's really thrilling for us to be able to see that too.
Yeah. Doing what we do, we've got to get some joy out of it. For ourselves and benefit what we're doing, dragging people kicking and screaming to their success.
Yes. And you know what? I think that's a really important point. We're talking about habits, we're talking about resilience, we're talking about, high performers and what are some of the secrets for that. And I think that, you have to want your own success from within. And, one of the things that we talk about in our program is, when you're looking at poor performance, you have to look beyond the surface in terms of what's actually driving the poor performance or the disengagement. And we use Gino Wickman's concepts of the GWC, which is the gets it, wants it, can do it. And I think that a lot of the time, the challenge is that sometimes leaders want for their team members their success more than the team members want it for themselves. What do you think is a great way to bring that into someone's awareness? Or if you're a leader that recognises that, what would you say to someone like that?
Yeah, great question. I think off the back of that, the big takeaways we got from our leadership kickoff this level is where we talked about the analogy of the iceberg and the 80-20 rule, where 20% of the iceberg is above the waterline, which you can see, 80% is below the waterline. We map that across to behaviour. The 20% of the behaviour you see is above the waterline, but there's all this stuff going on below the waterline, the 80%, and it comes from a positive intention. And a lot of the time people are making judgment on that first surface sort of structure and not going deeper into finding out what's the real problem.
Assumptions
which leads to assumptions, yeah. So they're not going deeper and finding that. So as a result of that, they're not asking deep enough questions, and then they're actually not seeing the team member for this behaviour, not what they actually can do. And they're looking at people and they're making judgments. Oh, this person leaves on time. They're clock watchers, so therefore they're not a leader. Yet, we had a scenario where this person was doing that because they had made an agreement with their wife. The wife would drop them off in the morning because they'd start early and they'd finish them off. And it wasn't a leadership conversation at all. It was basically an agreement they had made and gone through doing that. And I challenged the leader on that. I said, well, have you asked the question? Are they willing to look at something different? Have you asked the question, or are you just looking at that behaviour and going, oh, they're clock watchers. They're not going to do the process. And funnily enough, the conversation had took place and like, oh, look, I'm happy to be flexible. I just got to work this out. As I'm more than happy to do the hours.
Didn't know it was a problem.
Didn't know it was a problem. I'm doing the best I can. I'm managing my kids and doing all these sort of things, and that's what we do, and we go through the process. Yeah. And as a result of that, all of a sudden, it turned out to be quite a good leader and stepped up into the role, as opposed to looking at someone and goes, oh, this person's always staying back late. They must be a good leader. And it's just because that person actually doesn't want to have to do the work tomorrow.
Or even sometimes it's because they're completely inefficient during the day. I remember I managed someone one time who spent their entire day talking to their colleagues at the water cooler, at the coffee machine, walking to the coffee shop, walking back from the coffee shop, and every time I looked up, this person was just having conversations, which they were very likeable. But then they'd have to stay back all the time because they got nothing done during the day.
Which person, they're working all these hours. Yeah, they must be a great leader.
Wow, what a great person. They're staying back all these hours. Actually, I realised that they were actually not very productive. So I think the point that you're making is a really important one, because what I'm hearing you say is that assumption is the mother of misunderstandings, and without questions, without asking those questions and really finding out what's below the surface of the iceberg, we're really not going to really know. And I think that when we assess that, sometimes we have to hear it from the person rather than making those assumptions.
Absolutely. Very good. Look, probably the biggest obstacle or the biggest objection we get, the biggest reason we get in pretty much every kickoff we do. In fact, I've had one kickoff where it did come up, which is unusual. Yeah. And after I mentioned that, actually, no, now you mentioned it, should have been in there. was the concept of time. I don't have enough time. Now, one thing we know is that time is a commodity. Everybody has exactly the same amount of time in the day, no matter how much money you got. Yeah. So therefore, how we use it, it's really important. And we do a lot of training around that concept. So tell me, what are some of the habits and some of the ways in which leaders can be a little bit more conscious of their time and what they can do to make the most out of their time to be able to go through the process? We talk about 15-minute intervals. We talk about tasks around time to be able to hold people accountable. So give me a bit of insight into what can people do that are endeavouring to get more out of their team, but again, the objection of, I don't have time, I'm too busy for that already.
Yeah, I think it's such a fun topic to talk about because it's almost every single kickoff, every single engagement we start with time. And one of the interesting things about time is that no one ever believes that they have enough of it. And more importantly, they're all trying to figure out how they can be more efficient so that they can squeeze more in. And I think that one of my favourite sayings is that if you work an 8-hour day, or you're contracted to work an 8-hour day, then there are only 32 sets of 15-minute blocks in an 8-hour day. So
who works an 8-hour day?
Well, yeah, exactly. I mean, I know that we'll have some people that, will be watching along here that they're like 10 hours, 12 hours. Some entrepreneurs never sleep, those sorts of things. But I think let's work on the basis that the traditional kind of work day is considered to be 8 hours. And so in any 8-hour day, there's only 32 sets of 15-minute blocks, which means that you get if you had jobs that take 15 minutes, which by the way, everybody thinks that the small things, it should just take me 15 minutes, you could only do really 32 things. But we know that often...
Say that again. Only 15
32
minutes a day.
sets.
There's only 32 things we could do a day.
32
only
things.
32.
Only 32 in 15 minutes. But you see, no one actually takes 15 minutes to do the one thing, right? We often will overestimate how long something will take. And sometimes people actually block out too much time. And then with Parkinson's law, the task expands to fit the time that you've allocated to it. So we're kind of starting behind the 8 ball before we've even started here. So the thing that I'd like to encourage people to do, rather than looking at how they can put more in, rather than looking at how can they be more efficient, and I think Mike Michalowicz, in one of his books, he's like, you're totally an entrepreneur. I bet you that you are trying to figure out how you can be more productive and put more in your day, so much so that you're probably listening to this podcast or this audio book on 1 or 2.5 times speed. And it was really funny because I was listening to it at 2.5 times speed, and people around me wondering how I could possibly process that information. But I think that's a lot of the time what people do. They try and figure out, how can I get more in? When one of the biggest insights I think that I've ever had, and that seems to continue to be transformational with the clients that we work with, is how do we do a time audit to figure out what do we need to cut out? Because the reality is that you can't multitask. That's non-existent. There are some people that are very good at switching tasks, like they can switch from one task to another quite quickly. But the reality is you can't focus on more than one thing at a time, right? And so we want to eliminate the things that we're not really needing to do. And I think that, certainly the people that are listening to this, one of the things that they could do is do a bit of a time audit and figure out what happens in my day out of those 32 sets of 15-minute blocks that is actually still productive, or am I just doing this because I've always done it? And if you do what you've always done, then you get what you've always got. So time for a time audit, right?
Yeah, good. And I think a good thing in that time audit is being aware of how often you're getting interrupted by the time thieves.
The time thieves?
Yeah. The people that come there and take your time without permission. Can you just quickly ask you this quick question about what we can do about this? And you go, okay, let me help you find that. And all of a sudden it's gone. Yeah. So doing an audit on that and keeping track of the people who are interrupting you or asking you questions which you know the answer to, and they've certainly got the okay to go ahead and do it, who don't do it because they're relying on your time to be the factor of that.
And that comes full circle to what we were talking about earlier, which is saying things the way you want it, putting boundaries in place and making sure that you're communicating. And so we'll probably close off this podcast today by sharing with you one of our favourite presuppositions of neuro-linguistic programming, which is the meaning of the communication is the response you get. So if you don't like how it's going, then say it the way you want it and then put the habits in place that get you to that point.
Yep, fantastic. Good job.
Thank you so much.
Awesome. Thank
Cheers,
you, everybody.
bye. Thanks, guys.